Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahabushai, Bahasham, Barakahak Wadash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahabushai. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya coming at you with another lesson, and I'm going to start it off with Daniel chapter 7, verse 19. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others. And this is talking about those legs of iron in the vision that King Nebuchadnezzar saw, that the prophet Daniel broke down in Daniel chapter 2, the ancient pagan Edomite Roman Empire. And it was diverse from the other kingdoms because what? It had a Senate house with elected senators, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. Verse 20, and the 10 horns which were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell. Now we're going into the last leg of the fourth beast, those iron toes mixed with miry clay, the reincarnated Roman Empire, this NATO EU system, which the U.S. is a part of and at the head of, and it began with the Renaissance or the rebirth back in the late 1300s when the Edomites started coming back into power, and that other little horn that it's talking about, before whom 3 fell, is speaking of the United States of America, beginning with the 13 colonies, which became, what you know as the USA today. And those 3 that fell are speaking of the 3 major players in the New World before, it just became the United States, which was Britain, France, and Spain. Even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And I'm going to get that word stout in the Strongs, which is H7229, Ra'ab. And in the outline of biblical usage, it says great, figurative of power, captain, chief. And when you look at that whole NATO EU setup, America is, the chief power and at the head of it. Ever since World War II, these European nations have been playing second fiddle to the United States of America and their demands, more often than not, to their detriment, which is what I'll be getting into with this lesson. But now I'm going to go to an article on Reuters.com titled, Trump Threatens EU with Tariffs over oil and gas imports. And, Donald Trump hasn't even gotten into office yet, and he's already, having that more stout look than his fellows, already ordering demands to America's European allies. And, during Trump's, first presidency, he caused a lot of friction within the NATO and the EU, telling those European nations that they need to do more to fund NATO so the U.S. doesn't, shoulder all the burden. And then whenever the United States of America throws sanctions on countries or goes to war, it's these European nations that always feel the blowback. Look at these several refugee crises, from the war in Afghanistan, the Syrian civil war, the Libyan civil war, or the war in Iraq, and especially this situation, with Ukraine. America got her European allies to put sanctions on Russian natural gas and resources and oil. And who felt the blowback? Europe, because at that time they were getting a lot of that natural gas and oil from Russia. But now that they put those sanctions and cut them off and are getting it from the United States of America, they're having to pay more to get, that natural gas and oil from the U.S. And now you have DJ Donald Trump saying, look, if you don't get more oil and gas imports from us, we're going to throw tariffs on you. And what this is ultimately going to culminate in is America's European allies at some point during World War III turning against her and shooting their nuclear missiles onto the U.S. But let's get into this article. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump said on Friday the European Union should step up U.S. oil and gas imports or face tariffs on the bloc's exports that includes goods such as cars and machinery. And, right now, several of Europe's major economies are, going into recession, and a lot of companies are laying off workers. So they're in economic turmoil, and these purported tariffs is only going to make the situation that much worse and further drive that wedge between America and her European allies. The EU already buys the lion's share of U.S. oil and gas exports, according to U.S. government data. No extra volumes are currently available as the United States is exporting at capacity, but Trump has pledged to further grow the country's oil and gas production. I told the European Union that they must make up their tremendous deficit with the United States by large-scale purchase of our oil and gas, Trump said in a post on Truth Social. Otherwise, it is tariffs all the way, he added. But I'm jump around a little bit. Tariff threats. Trump, who takes office on January 20th, has vowed to impose a 10% on global imports, impose tariffs of 10% on global imports into the U.S., along with a 60% tariff on Chinese goods, duties that trade experts say would upend trade flows, raise costs, and draw retaliation against U.S. exports. And, you've already got Canada saying, look, with Donald Trump threatening these tariffs, hey, we're going to have to raise prices on our goods, which is just going to hurt the U.S. consumer. German and Italian car exports currently face a 2.5% U.S. tariff, which could quadruple if Trump makes good on his threats. And, you've had a lot of these European leaders start to say, well, look, if America and, Trump's for America first, hey, we need to start being Europe first, because clearly, we're getting the short end of the stick with our relationship with America. But let me see. Yeah, that's pretty much it with this article. But, we're dealing with the economic side of, that little horn having that stout look towards her fellows. But now let's go to the military side with the NATO situation. And this is a video from World Affairs in Context, which is Lena Petrova's YouTube channel, titled Trump versus EU, Threats Over Oil Exports, which we just read about, Wartime NATO Defense Spending, EU Decline, and Economic War. And I'm going to start the video at the 5-minute and 36-second mark. And this is a fair use copyright disclaimer. I do not own any of the footage in this clip, nor do I stand to gain from it monetarily. It is simply for educational purposes.
War. Let's start with the main point. European countries' defense spending increases, which is one of the requests or
I was clearly getting under the skin of several important climate communicators. I'm not going to play games.
Demands that was made by Trump. This is Trump's
His look was more stout than his fellows.
favorite topic, by the way, where he constantly argues that the United States is not obliged to bear the lion's share of NATO's defense costs, and that NATO allies should really carry as much of that burden as they can. They should carry a much larger portion of the expenses to relieve the burden on Americans. While the majority of those in the United States.
And what's crazy is, it's the U.S. and Britain that, pushed Europe into supporting Ukraine in that war, which, a lot of these European nations weren't for it because, again, they had a lot of lucrative economic and political ties with Russia, which just went down the drain with that war. And now you got Trump saying, look, hey, you're going to have to start spending about 5% of your GDP for NATO, to further, fight that war against Russia. And hey, again, it's going to be Europe that always feels the blowback because they're the ones that are literally on the front lines, on the borders with Russia. And, every other day, Russia is making threats towards the West and using their nuclear weapons due to, the West constantly crossing Russia's red lines. Lest we forget, Ukraine recently receiving those long-range nuclear missiles, which they have been shooting into Russia.
States would likely support this idea. Let's be honest, NATO cannot exist without the support of the United States.
Remember what that word stout said, great figurative of power, the captain, the chief. Lena Petrova just said NATO couldn't exist without the U.S. So, with that being the case, again, the U.S. is at the head of things and the U.S. is the shot caller.
The United States is the backbone of NATO. So Trump's commentary does put into question how many more of its purely offensive projects NATO will be able to entertain in the future and how far it will be able to take them. With a considerable political crisis in Europe now, there are many unknowns. Germany is heading to early elections. I discussed this in my recent video. You're welcome to watch it for more details. And in France, the government has been dismissed. The situation in the United Kingdom is also very tense with regard to the budget. At the same time, demanding that the EU countries shoulder 5% of their GDP on defense spending is a very, very ambitious request. The United States spends less than 3.5% of its GDP on defense. Russia, for comparison purposes, which is engaged in a full-scale war against the collective West, allocated nearly 6% of its GDP for military purposes this year, and it is set to increase its military spending budgeting to 6.3% the following year. So now, knowing that information, we can conclude that 5% is essentially the defense budget of a wartime country. The question then becomes, is NATO preparing for a full-scale war in the near future within the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, if it agrees to hike up its defense spending to 5%?
A major war is coming. Revelation 9 verse 12, one woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter, World War I, World War II, and of course, World War III, for which all intents and purposes, you can say we're in the beginning stages of.
The answer to that question will be very telling in my personal opinion, because at this time, no NATO country spends 5% of its GDP on defense. Germany and France, for example, spend just north of 2%. Italy and Spain spend less than 2%, and they are unlikely to support doubling down on that effort. Increasing defense spending by the EU countries might be favored by US politicians. I have no doubts about that, but it will be a very difficult conversation domestically for those countries. It will likely result in a political turmoil within those European countries, as their populations do not want to go to war with Russia despite the propagandized Russophobia.
And that's exactly what you're going to see. More turmoil politically, economically, and militarily, and divisions being driven between America and her European allies. But that's it with that video. Let's get back to these precepts. This is Daniel chapter 2, verse 40, going into that statue that King Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. The head of gold being the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the breasts and the arms of silver, the Medo-Persians, the thighs and the bellies of brass, the Grecian kingdoms under the Edomites, or so-called white people, the legs of iron, the ancient pagan Roman Empire, and then, the feet the iron toes mixed with miry clay. This is Daniel chapter 2, verse 40. And they got that header saying Rome. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Verse 41, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. This NATO EU system, which the U.S. is at the head of, and the part of iron and part of clay can go into two things. On the one hand, you have the stronger economic nations in this system, such as Britain, France, Germany, and the United States, and you got the weaker nations economically, the clay, which are usually referred to as the pigs, such as Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And then that iron can also represent the military aspect, NATO, while the clay, the economic, the EU. But as it says, the kingdom shall be divided. And as we just saw from that clip with Lena Petrova, due to Trump, purporting to call for a 5% GDP to fund NATO, that's going to cause divisions within, Europe and, divisions between America and her allies, because, a lot of nations, they don't want to put up that money for it. And a lot of nations don't want war against Russia. And again, it's going to be Europe that's going to be on the front lines of a war against Russia. And then, as we read in that article, Trump is threatening to throw tariffs on the EU if they don't import more oil and gas, which, they're already importing a lot. And, a lot of experts say they're at capacity of importing. They really can't do much more. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And we're coming into the times to where this kingdom is going to be completely broken when Europe turns against the U.S. and shoots those nukes onto her. This is Obadiah chapter 1. I'm going to start at verse 1. The vision of Obadiah, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, concerning Edom. And this whole book is dedicated to the judgment of you Edomites. We have heard a rumor from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. And, you got a lot of these, third world, second world nations turning against the West. Hence why you got systems like the BRICS being set up. But now I'm going to jump down to verse 7. And, like I said, this book is dedicated to you Edomites, but this verse is dedicated to you American Edomites and your allies turning against you. All the men of thy confederacy, or your allies, have brought thee even to the border, the men that were at peace with thee, buying your oil and natural gas and putting up money to fund NATO, have deceived thee and prevailed against thee, turning against you and actually, allying themselves with Russia to shoot those nukes onto America. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. But now I'm going to close it out in Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast. And remember back in Daniel chapter 7, verse 19 to 20, talking about the 10 horns and, the 7 heads. But right here, those 10 horns are speaking of the EU or European Union, beginning with the first 10 common markets of the EU, back when it was known as the European Economic Community, which thou sawest upon the beast, which is NATO. These shall hate the whore, mystery Babylon, that rides upon the beast, Babylon the Great, which is speaking of the United States of America, whose look was more stout than her fellows. Remember what Lena Petrova said, the U.S. is the backbone of NATO. And literally, as it says, the whore is riding upon the beast, riding upon that beast's back. These shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire, nuclear fire from those nuclear missiles, which is going to turn the U.S. into the biblical lake of fire and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards. And all these different events we're seeing take place are going to lead to this ultimate outcome. But that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope your sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. We are almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babol, Kwam Yasharella, and until next time, Shalom.